Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says Vodafone wins 2 billion tax case. We have something called as the capital asset. What is a capital asset? It includes a land, a building, a property, so on and so forth. When this capital asset is sold to another person, we generate certain profit or a gain. So this gain that I am getting, I have to pay some taxes to the government of India. That is what is called as the capital gains tax. So what is the gain here? I have a property. I'm selling this particular property. I'm gaining money from this particular property. So I have to pay certain taxes to the government of India, and that is what is called as capital gains tax. We have something called as the inheritable property. What is it? Let's say for example, my grandfather has a property. Now this property is given to me. So do I have to pay capital gains tax? No. Let's say my father has a property. He has given this property to me. Do I have to pay capital gains tax? No. But if this property given to me by my grandfather or by my father, and if this property I happen to sell it to a third party, that is when capital gains tax will have to be paid. So whenever there is an inherited property, this will not be applicable. Then we have a concept called as the withholding tax. What is this withholding tax? Let me give you an example. Let's say there is a company A, and let's say there is a company B. B is going through a lot of losses. The company wants to bundle its operations, so it approaches A and asks A to please buy this company. So the deal is set for about, let's say hypothetical numbers, about 100 crores. So what does A do? A will not pay the entire 100 crores, but instead holds a sum of about 10 crores. Why? Because this is a tax, this is a capital gain. So he holds 10 crores, pays it to the government of India, and this remaining 90 crores directly will be paid to B. What is the ideal condition? The ideal condition is, because B is happening to sell his capital asset, he is the one who is supposed to pay the tax. But in this particular case of withholding tax, it is not B who should be paying the tax, but it is A who has to hold on to certain percentage of tax and pay the remaining only to B. So that amount which is withhold is paid to the government of India. Why are we discussing all this? That is because this whole case of Vodafone is to do with withholding tax. We have the Vodafone International Holding, which happens to be a Dutch-based company. There is another company called as the Hutchison Telecommunication International Limited. This company happens to sell CGP Investments Holding Company to whom? To Vodafone. But kindly remember, this CGP Investments Holding Company is not based in India, but it is present in Cayman Islands. What is the conflict here? Cayman Islands company, that is CJP, has about 67% share in the Hutchison SR Limited. So what is the conflict here? The conflict right now is between Vodafone and the tax departments. What does the Indian tax department say? The Indian tax department say this is an Indian company. So when you're buying an Indian company, you will have to make sure that you're holding on to the tax and then paying us this particular money. This is what the Indian tax department says. But then the Vodafone International Holding says this is a Cayman based island company. We did not buy the Hutchison SR Limited directly in India, but we bought CGP Investments Holding Company, which is based in Cayman, and because we got that particular company, we have about 67% share in Hutchison SR Limited. This is what is the conflict. So the income tax department say that you should have holded the tax, paid it to us, but the Vodafone says that we did not buy the Indian company directly, but because we bought another foreign company, we got this company because they had shares in Hutchison Limited. This is what the conflict is all about. The income tax department asks Vodafone to pay the money, but the Vodafone company does not pay that particular money. So this ultimately ends to the court of law. So when they go to the Bombay High Court, the Bombay High Court clearly says that the Vodafone will have to pay tax taxes. Why? Because this is an Indian based company. Since it is an Indian based company which has 67% share in the CGP investments, you the Vodafone will have to pay the taxes, says the Bombay High Court. But this was not good for the Vodafone. So what do? They approach the Supreme Court of India. So the Supreme Court of India looks into all the cases, looks into the whereabout of it, and looks into the merits of it, and ultimately gives this particular judgment in favor of the Vodafone. The Supreme Court looks into this income tax law, and it says if there is a direct sale of a capital asset, that is an Indian company sold to another foreign company, that is when they have to pay the withholding tax. But in this particular case, it is not a direct transaction. An Indian company was not bought directly, but instead we have it through the indirect process, which is not mentioned in the Income Tax Act. So here the Supreme Court judgment says that Vodafone need not have to pay Indian government or the Indian tax department. This is when the Indian tax department looks into it, and then the government comes up with the legislation to overcome this particular issue. So what does the government do? The government introduces what is called as the Finance Act Amendment. What is this Finance Act Amendment? This clearly says in case there is an acquiring company acquiring an Indian company directly or indirectly, they have to pay taxes to the government of India. When you look at the original act, it does not speak about the indirect acquisition, but this new amendment speaks about indirect acquisition as well. So what happens? This comes into implementation from the retrospective effect. So retrospective here means that Vodafone will have to pay all the taxes to the government of India. Therefore, once this particular introduction was made by the parliament, that is when entire onus falls on Vodafone and they had to pay their taxes right now. This is when there was international criticism as well. India tried to settle this particular issue amicably with Vodafone, but this was not settled amicably. In fact, we also have the Vodafone Group, which also invoked clause 9 of the bilateral investment treaty between India and Netherlands. What is this bilateral investment treaty? This is an agreement between two countries. What happens? There would be companies from Netherlands which might be operating in India, or Indian companies which might be operating in Netherlands. They need to be promoted, they need to be protected. So that agreement is what is called as the bilateral investment treaty. So this is about protecting the companies which are operating in each other's territory. This was invoked by clause 9 by the Vodafone company. Why did it invoke? Because Vodafone happens to be a Netherlands based company, that is Vodafone International Holding, and because they were not protected, terms and conditions were violated, they happened to take it to the Permanent Court of Arbitration. The Permanent Court of Arbitration, which is based in Hague, looks into this particular issue and it criticizes the move of India. Why? Because India's retrospective demand of placing some capital tax on Vodafone was wrong, says this particular order issued by the Permanent Court of Arbitration. In fact, it has also asked India not to pursue the tax demand anymore against the Vodafone Group. And what this means is there is violation of the BIT, that is the Bilateral Investment Treaty, and at the same time India is not honoring some of the principles, says the Permanent Court of Arbitration. And at the same time, it has also directed India to pay about 4.3 million pounds to the company as compensation for its legal cost. It is this that we have to understand with reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about cess. First, we have to understand what is this cess. A cess is nothing but a tax on a tax. So what is a tax on a tax? This is a tax that is imposed not on the taxable income, but it is levied on the tax payable income. So a cess can be applied both on the direct as well as the indirect taxes. Normally, when it comes to the direct tax or the indirect taxes or any type of taxes, it usually comes to the Consolidated Fund of India. Similarly, whenever there is a cess that is imposed by the Government of India, the same will fall under the Consolidated Fund of India. But there is a small difference. What is it? Let's say, for example, there is a direct tax or the indirect tax, all fall under the Consolidated Fund of India. This can be used for any purpose. It can be for for the defense purposes, it can be for the education purposes, communication, or development of infrastructure as well. But when a cess is levied, it is levied for a specific purpose. So when a cess is imposed, it is for the education. This money cannot be spent for the environmental purpose. If it is used only for the environmental purpose, this cannot be used for the defense purpose. So explicitly, it is for a specific purpose. And also remember, when it comes to the taxation or the revenue generated from multiple taxes, this will have to be shared as per the policy that is enforced by the Finance Commission. But when it comes to the cess, these proceeds need not be shared with the state government. Some of the examples of cess include Krishi Kalyan cess or infrastructure cess on motor vehicles. So when a cess is implied, imposed, levied, it can be used only for that specific purpose. Also remember, when it comes to cess, it is easy for the central government to introduce, modify, or to abolish as well. That is why they always take the call of introducing a cess for a specific purpose. When it comes to cess, there is something called as the dedicated fund. What is this dedicated fund? All the money from this particular cess collection will go to the Consolidated Fund of India. But you also require the permission of the Parliament to spend from this Consolidated Fund of India. But we also have to know which money is for what, because we have taken the cess only for the education sector. So in that particular backdrop, the government establishes what is called as the dedicated fund. Now let's say, for example, with respect to the primary education, the government establishes a fund called as Prarambhik Shiksha Kosh, and when it comes to the higher and secondary education, it establishes a fund called as Madhyamik and Uchatar Shiksha Kosh. So what becomes important is establishment of an independent fund. So this fund cannot be used for any other purpose. This is the general meaning of it. But what is the present scenario? There was an audit that was undertaken by the Comptroller and Auditor General with respect to use of cess by the Government of India. According to it, 40% of all cess collections in 2018 and 19 was retained by the Finance Ministry in the Consolidated Fund of India. So what should be the ideal way? Ideally, whenever it falls into the Consolidated Fund of India, it has to be pushed into a dedicated fund. But instead of pushing into a dedicated fund, they have retained in the Consolidated Fund of India, which means there are three major concerns. What are these three major concerns? One, it has inflated the revenue. So ideally, this is not collected from the tax, but this is a separate cess, which means the revenue, that which is projected by the government, is currently inflated. So what happens with respect to revenue? There is overstatement of the revenue, and at the same time, when it comes to the fiscal deficit, there is understatement as well, which also means that the government has collected the money for the education sector, for the health sector, or for the environmental sector as well, but this is not being utilized for that specific purpose, and as a result, that sector suffers during that particular period. So kindly remember, this is a non-lapsable fund. And when it comes to 2018 and 19, the government in this particular case had yielded 2.75 lakh crore in the year, but just 1.65 lakh crore was remitted to the specific reserve funds, but the rest was retained by the government in the Consolidated Fund of India. And at the same time, when you look at the GST, there is something called as the GST compensation cess fund. So what should happen ideally? The entire cess collected during that particular period will go into what is called as the non-lapsable fund, which is nothing but the GST compensation fund, which is also part of the public account, and it is meant specifically to compensate the state for the losses of their revenue. But in this particular case, it had again retained for almost 2 years, says the CAG in this particular article, which means the central government is violating some of the laws when it comes to GST, and also violating the socio-economic principles of spending it for the education sector, for the health sector, or for the environmental sector. So what is that we have to understand? When the central government has not utilized it for all these years, it means all those sectors have been suffering, and at the same time in the near future, whenever the central government is imposing certain cesses, it has to be rationalized and it should not be arbitrary as well. Only when you are able to use it for that particular period, use it, or else it has to be rationalized as well. So immediately whatever cess has been there, it has to make sure that it is effectively using it. There has to be absolute transparency when it comes to its dealings, and at the same time it should also publish an annual document about the manner of the spending when it comes to the cess collection, is what this article all about. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about importance of parliamentary committee. When we had the constitution being drafted, number of people had number of debates. Should we adopt presidential system? Should we adopt parliamentary system? But most of them did get into a consensus that we have to adopt what is called as the parliamentary system of democracy. Why parliamentary democracy? That is because it has the very beauty of representation, responsiveness, and also keeping the executive under check and control. This is why they went with what is called as the parliamentary system of democracy. Another importance of parliamentary system of democracy is that the executive will be accountable to the legislature on a day-to-day basis. Even if it is a small minority of the legislature, they can still keep the executive under check as well. And at the same time, what it can also show is that all these people are also indirectly accountable to their constituencies. That is another reason why parliamentary system or the parliamentary democracy was adopted by the Constituent Assembly. So when it comes to the parliamentary democracy, we have number of ways as to how the legislature can keep an executive under check. We have the question hour, we also have the no confidence motion, and one of the other tools and an instrument is what is called as the committee system. So this committee system also has an increasing role when it comes to exercising its control over the executive. Where do they draw their powers from? When it comes to the parliamentary committees, they draw their power from Article 105, which speaks about privileges of parliament members, and it is also 118 of the Indian Constitution, which speaks about regulating the procedures and conduct of the business of the parliament. Now, what we have to look at is merits when it comes to the parliamentary committees. In a parliamentary committee, what we can actually do is examine a topic in depth. What happens? Let's say, for example, there is a particular farm bill. There are about 700 odd people in the parliament. If everyone has an opinion, it will be an utter chaos when it comes to the parliament. So what happens? You have the representations from all political parties when it comes to the parliamentary committee. So these people enter into the parliamentary committee. Parties will send their experts into this parliamentary committee and they debate, they also come up with a consensus, and they also recommend suitable measures when it comes to that particular topic. So when it comes to the normal analogy, you can't have all the 700 people to discuss about a particular bill, but when it goes to a parliamentary committee, because it is also based on proportional representation in that particular committee, we will have all political parties voicing their opinion and their representatives coming up with rational arguments. This parliamentary committee will also be a bedrock for all the experts. Let's say, for example, there is a bill, let's say it is the farm bill, which is in controversy recently. If there are experts in a particular political party, they will send that particular expert to this parliamentary committee. So what will they do? They will look into the loopholes and they may also suggest as well. And at the same time, they can also bring in experts from outside. They can seek their opinions as well. They can also look at all those people who are impacted. Several people also testify this particular rules and regulations. So in case there are lack of experts, they can also bring in experts, ask their viewpoints. In case there are people suffering from it, they can ask their viewpoints and ultimately give the recommendation to the government of India. These parliamentary committees will also make sure that there is no public glare as well. What happens in the parliamentary proceedings? You would be able to see what is happening in Lok Sabha, you would be able to see what is happening in Rajya Sabha, and in case you have the member of parliament representing your constituency, he has to comply by the pressure of the constituency. But when it comes to the parliamentary committee, there are no public glare, so he would be able to project his views, his narratives, irrespective irrespective of what the public glare and the constituency pressure is. We also have the anti-defection law, which does not allow a partyman to speak against the party. But when it comes to the parliamentary committees, anti-defection law does not hold good. Let's say I'm a person from BJP which is currently in power, but I as a person being a part of BJP, I may not be able to oppose the farm bill when it comes to the parliamentary proceedings. But if I am part of the parliamentary committee, I would also be able to voice my opinion, and anti-defection law will not picture in and whip will not be issued against me. There would also be specific areas who would have built expertise in that. Let's say for example, when it comes to Shashi Tharoor, who is representing Congress, might have exposure when it comes to the international relations, so he can also bring his narrative when it comes to that particular committee as well. So all these recommendations mean that they are keeping the executive under check, they are keeping the executive under control, and they are asking questions to the executive through the parliamentary committee. So these are the merits and advantages when it comes to the parliamentary committee. But the author of this article says that this has led to gradual marginalization as well. Why? That is because ideally most of these bills will have to be sent to the parliamentary committee. But in the present scenario, in spite of the opposition parties, opposition political parties have been requesting to send it to the parliamentary committee. The government is not complying by it. Let's look at some of the statistics. 60% of the bills in the Lok Sabha and 71% in the 15th Lok Sabha was vetted by the departmentally related standing committees. But when it comes to the 16th Lok Sabha, it is just about 27%. So what we see here is that there is a gradual dip when it comes to referring the bills in Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha to the parliamentary committees, which means the legislature is not able to keep a check on the executive. When all political parties are opposing certain bills, this will ideally have to be recommended to the parliamentary committee so that they can keep a check on the executive. But the statistics clearly reveal that they are not being sent to the parliamentary committees, and that means the executive indirectly is not kept in check by the legislature. So going forward, what the author suggests is that all these important bills, in case they have opposition from multiple opposition parties, that will have to be sent to the parliamentary committee. A consensus will have to be generated, and that is when it has to be ultimately passed. But also remember, when it comes to all these parliamentary committees, their recommendations is not mandatory, they are only advisory in nature. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about intra-Afghan talks, US and Taliban talks. We have discussed about this article couple of times, but let me give you a gist of what this article all about. We have two groups when it comes to intra-Afghan talks. One represented by Taliban, the other represented by government representing the democracy. We have statements made by the government, that is Abdullah Abdullah, and Mullah Ghani Baradar, who is representing the Taliban, and both their statements are contradictory in nature. So we had intra-Afghan talks that was to be taken up, but these intra-Afghan talks, when they are discussing it, their viewpoints are totally different and they are at opposite ends as well. While we have Abdullah and Abdullah representing the government, he speaks for equal rights for everyone, including the minorities and the women. That is not the same when it comes to Taliban. Taliban is straightforward. It wants to establish an Islamic emirate in Afghanistan. So it means that democracy, human rights, equal rights for women and minorities will not be othered by the Taliban is the first key argument. Then we have the United States of America, which entered into a talk with Taliban. So what was the major objective? That it will move away from Afghanistan, they will have intra-Afghan talks, and ultimately democracy could be established is what United States of America felt. But when you look at the present scenario, United States of America is not giving a care, or it is not thinking about what would happen in Afghanistan, but their only aim is to move out of Afghanistan. So what would be the political settlement in Afghanistan is not at all their perspective. Why? Because election elections are coming in November, because they have to withdraw, they have to make sure that they have done something good in Afghanistan. There is political settlement is what United States of America is thinking, and they're not worried about Afghanistan, says the second perspective. So basically, United States of America only wants to say that they have neutralized Al Qaeda in Afghanistan. There was killing of the Osama bin Laden, elections and democracy were enforced in Afghanistan, and they have built a platform for the intra-Afghan dialogue, which means they have done everything for the establishment of peace. But ideally, that is not the same, says the author of this article. And at the same time, when you come at the intra-Afghan talks, there is something called as different perspectives and viewpoints. Why? Let's say, for example, Abdullah, who is representing the government right now, he literally hates speaking to Taliban. Then you also have the Afghan president, who also has reservations when it comes to how Taliban would operate in the near future. But why are these people coming and joining in the dialogue process? That is because United States of America said in case they are not able to join this particular talk process, the aid that is being given by the United States of America will be withdrawn. So because there was blackmailing, that is why they came to this particular talk, is another argument. Fourth point that we have to look at is what is the Taliban wants from this particular talks. Whether it wants to establish democracy, does it want to give equal rights to the women, does it want to respect the minorities in Afghanistan? The answer is clear cut no. All that they want to do is to transform Afghanistan into an Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, says the author of this article. And when Taliban does get its hands on the power in Afghanistan, there will be more violence, says the author of this article. Even when United States of America and Taliban were speaking, there were large-scale violence that was infuriating major people in Afghanistan. And at the same time, there was no ceasefire as well. It was only in the talks, but when it came to the reality, violence, butchering and killing continued. Finally, we have United States of America, which will be withdrawing from Afghanistan. So you have number of forces which have already in talks with each other. That includes Russia, that includes Iran, Pakistan, China, as well as India as well. All these countries are currently saying because there is United States of America, we are not engaging directly with Afghanistan. So what needs to be looked forward is when United States of America goes out, how is that all these countries will come together and will bring peace in Afghanistan, is what we have to wait and watch. It is this that we have to understand with reference to this article. Now let's look into some of the preliminary practice questions. Fridays for Future, recently seen in news, is a global climate strike movement, day that highlights the importance of fresh water, human rights initiative by Amnesty International, worldwide movement against child labor. The answer to this is A, which is global climate strike movement. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. So kindly remember, Fridays for Future is a global climate strike movement. Now let's look into the next practice question. With reference to Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, which of the following statements is or correct? Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar introduced the practice of widow remarriage and worked against polygamy. Barna Parichay is a Bengali primer written by Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. Which of the statements are correct? The answer to this is both. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this ad. Now let's look into the next practice question. Which of the following insurance companies have been identified as domestic systematically important insurers for 2020 and 21 by insurance regulator IRDAI? Is it Life Insurance Corporation of India, General Insurance Corporation of India, the New India Assurance Co? The answer to this is 1, 2 and 3. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. So what is this domestic systematically important insurers? This basically includes all those insurers who are huge in size, have market importance, they have domestic and global interconnectedness, and in case they face some stress or a failure in the near future, this will have implications on the domestic financial system. That is why these three companies or the organizations will become part of what is called as the domestically systematically important insurers. So now what will happen? Because they are coming under this particular bracket, they will have additional regulatory measures that they have to comply by. These DSIIs are also perceived as insurers that are too big or too important to fail. Now let's look into the next practice question. The term IND-ARC, sometimes seen in the news, is the name of an indigenously developed radar system inducted into the Indian defense. This is wrong. India's satellite to provide services to the countries of Indian Ocean Rim. This is wrong. A scientific establishment set up by India in Antarctic region. This is wrong. The answer to this is India's underwater observatory to scientifically study the Arctic region. Now let's look into the mains practice question. Proper utilization of cess proceeds and absolute transparency in the management of cess receipts is imperative to meet socio-economic goals. In the light of the statement, examine the need for rationalizing the levy of cess. Next question. The primary role of parliament is deliberation, discussion, ensuring executive accountability. Discuss the various tools and instruments that parliament can use to exercise control over the executive with special emphasis on committees. So please write all your answers on the comment section, peer review, and also come up with constructive criticism. This is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.